Is there any evidence-based, scientific, valid information to support the use of X for Y?
You're listening to Good is in the Details. I'm Gwendolyn Dolsky.
And I'm Rudy Sallow.
And this is the podcast where we learn what we didn't know in the spirit of Socrates, all with the aim of a more knowledgeable life, a happy life, an informed life. I want to give a shout out to Rich Balling of The Sound of Animals Fighting for this intro music. Just thank you, thank you, thank you. Okay, we have got returning guest, Servite grad, friend, and we better see you at the reunion because Rudy and I are going. He is of the National Academy of Sports Medicine, our friend Rich Fahmy. What did you think, Rudy?
I was very pleased that Rich reached out to us because it's a really good unofficial partnership that we have really with Rich, and I'm very happy that he probably has these ideas. Maybe his own channel there it's not the proper place for it, but he knows the proper place to talk about. I suppose health influencers falls into the category of pop culture / current events, right, Gwen? Because the other night we were at a podcast meetup, hats off to our friend Greg Wasserman, and people were, asking us about the show, and I said, we're a philosophy podcast, and that, their eyes are kind of, I think they're immediately going towards like, oh my God, are these guys a bunch of academic nerds? One of us is, one of us isn't. But I was like, no, but wait. What we do is we take something that's really relevant, either pop culture or current event wise, and we approach it through a philosophical lens. Health influencers, with the rise of TikTok, Instagram, and social media, they are literally getting some laws changed, right? Technically, our current head of Department of Human Health and Services in the United States was a health influencer. Yeah, prior to his current position. However you feel about him, I'm just saying, like, they have a lot of power. So Gwen, what is the philosophical lens that you can put on this show and our review of health influencers, if you can do so?
In our critical thinking toolbox, we want to really understand what is expertise, because there is this theme of the experts don't know, and there's this anti-intellectual movement culturally. I think it's partly this feeling of being talked down to that is frustrating. Maybe people in the ivory tower have just lost a sense of communication. But really, what an expert is that they have a study of the subject in question. It has been peer reviewed, and peer doesn't mean your buddies. It means other people who've studied the exact same thing, and they are able to work with the material. It has to do with data. That is what it means to have expertise, and also experience and publications. So there's this theme of saying, ignore the experts. I have this other thing that they don't know about. And then you get excited because it's like you're part of this secret. This other class of people in their ivory tower don't know. And it is having disastrous consequences for the medical community and for people who are into fitness, health, and sports medicine like Rich. So we really want to examine, wait a minute, what do we mean by expertise? We also want to understand what is meant by data and by reading labels so that we can figure it out ourselves. I think that's one of the biggest things. I will say, I heard a bioethicist, she said something that I had not thought of. The money. People who are in this industry, like our current Secretary of Health, they have already started out with a lot of money, and they are getting a lot of money based on this idea that the experts are all wrong. But another impact is the fact that medical care in this country is so expensive. So imagine if you have some sort of a chronic illness, you're not insured properly, or the co-pays, they just keep adding up and adding up because you have to go to this doctor, that doctor, that doctor. So a $40 copay doesn't sound like it's that big of a deal, but if you're constantly getting passed around to a new specialist, that adds up very quickly. So if somebody comes along and says, hey, I have this supplement for $28 and it will heal you and make you better, you can see why somebody would go for that. The problem is the people who are going for that are not in the same financial position as the influencer. The influencer who does buy into this thing, when push comes to shove and they are taken to the emergency room, they can afford to change their mind. those wealthy people have that opportunity to get all the medical care that they need. But it's not the same for the person who is already suffering and is unable to afford the medical care, and so then goes for this option that it might be too late for them. They've multiplied all of their symptoms as a result. My mind is just blown away by that scenario. So this discussion about wellness and influencers and how to understand what exactly they are selling, what exactly is an expert, how do we read data, how do we read labels, how do we understand science and testing, it has very, very real consequences. It's not just about wanting to look thin or something like that. I really love this episode, and I actually in the future want to dive more into this topic in bioethics as well.
That's great. Would it be as simple as, if a gun was put to our head and we had to put like a philosophical slot of like a saying, and this would fall under, would this fall under what is truth and what the impact of what truth means? Would it kind of fall under that slot, Gwen?
Yeah, I think the truth is something that we want. I mean, everybody wants to be healthy. We want to feel good. I think this really has to do with those basic critical thinking skill tools that are under the umbrella of philosophy. And at the same time, business ethics. Are you creating something that is solely for your own wealth, or are you contributing to society and the money is the byproduct, right? Like, I'm not against money. Money is the byproduct. That's wonderful. But what are we putting out into the world? What constitutes a good business? And so I think some of these models wouldn't fall under good business if you only look at a business as something that's making money. I think good entails more than that. So
Great.
I think that's where
great.
we are. That was a lot. I didn't mean to do so much
I'm
for
putting
the intro.
putting your philosophical toesy woesies to the fire there.
There's a lot here. So Rich, thank you for coming up with this idea. And now all I want to do is talk about it some more. Rudy, what are we going to call this?
My last couple of pitches have been reworked. What about health, influencers, and the truth?
I love it. Let's do it. Let's dive in. Let's do this. Okay, Rich, third time on the pod. We're interested in wellness, fitness. Today we're going to be talking about influence culture. Maybe we can do some myth busting, some things to look out for. What is on your mind when we talk about wellness and fitness and influencers?
The biggest thing is that there's just the misinformation, at least as I see it, is much louder and more pervasive than the good evidence-based information, largely because, scientists aren't really great at selling sexy claims and using kind of alarmist language. The social media algorithms, for example, don't really pick that up as much. They tend to pick up, more polarizing language. So people are just exposed to more misinformation out there. And it can do harm to people because they can either forego medical diagnoses and start maybe some treatments or strategies that they believe are going to work because the influencer sounded so right and correct. It could do actual harm to people's health and be a public health problem.
What are some buzzwords? Because I'm glad you said that, the kind of language that's being used, just so that people can pay attention to that. In critical thinking, we'll talk about how are things defined, like what's a rhetorical definition versus a fact-based definition. So what is a word that we should pay attention to know if we're being influenced or if we're being provided something that is worth our time?
So influencers use a lot of, when I say influencers too, I'll be generally talking about the ones that are the population of folks that you probably shouldn't be listening to, because I know wellness influencer can be broad, but so when I use the term influencer, I mean the ones that are a little bit more deceptive. The stuff they tend to use language-wise, they build distrust in mainstream medicine and in science. They use things like, this is stuff that big pharma doesn't want you to know. They use sort of fear-mongering or alarmist language, or they break things down too simply. There's sort of lots of sensationalism. So if it's conspiracy-driven, it's polarizing, it's not only good to appeal to people, it has an emotional pull when they use language like that, but it also ramps up on the algorithm. They will label things as toxic. Certain foods are toxic or garbage, that they have the secrets to something. Of course, a lot of times they'll appeal to something being natural, all natural, or being around for thousands of years. As like the sort of the appeal to tradition or an appeal to nature. I mean, rabies has been around for over 4,000 years. It's both natural and been around a long time, but it's not good for you, right? But they just kind of use
Mhm.
that. They can also make sweeping claims without evidence of causation or any evidence really to back it up. In terms of not only with the language, but they use the language to prey on people's psychological tendencies and our psychological vulnerabilities. Oftentimes will appeal to authority. So they may have certain titles and letters after their name, but that doesn't mean they're qualified. And a lot of titles are unregulated. So like the term nutritionist, for example, doesn't have a legal definition or licensure to it. They appeal to trust. So sometimes they'll even provide good evidence-based information as a start to gain your trust, and then they move on to selling you something that could be false or unsupported. There's lots of tactics that they tend to use, but ultimately it's to create that emotional pull.
You know, you're right. Pharmaceuticals do make money, but
Yes.
just because somebody makes money from something, it doesn't follow that it's false, right?
Yes.
Yeah, yeah, there can be something that is good and it does make money, but the making the money isn't evidence that it's untrue or that the product isn't true. Because when they're saying big pharma, but at the same time, they're also selling a product. So they would
Yes.
make money from
Yes.
this.
Exactly right. Yeah, they're profiting as well. They also use that as a deflection tactic. So if you were to confront an influencer and actually present evidence, a lot of times what they do is they use this deflection tactic where they dismiss criticisms from valid professionals by saying, "Oh, you're just paid off by big pharma," or "You have a hidden agenda." When in reality, the influencer has an agenda. It's probably to sell you something or to gain a following or to build a brand. There's this common perception or, misconception that big pharma is interested in keeping people sick. My opinion is I don't really think that's their goal. I don't think their goal is to keep people sick. Granted, they are definitely profiting. They are going to follow profit. They are corporations. They're going to follow the money. But I don't think they're actively trying to keep people sick. But are they engaged in their business for profit? Yes. But like you're saying, it doesn't mean that there's an evil intent associated with that every time. But a lot of these influencers prey on that, and then they associate you with the quote unquote evil corporation to try and discredit you. In reality, you just might be a scientist who's actually dedicated your life to studying a particular topic and area or field and are just trying to protect the public health.
Yeah, and there can be a disinterested party as well. So if the physician is prescribing you something and then somebody wants to say, like, oh, that's just big pharma paying them off, there are disinterested parties, scientists who do peer reviews and studies of what is being
Yes.
prescribed. It's not just between the pharmaceutical and the physician, but with the influencers, there isn't that disinterested party to do some of the work. I'm interested in the psychology of the fact that it works in the first place, which means that we're still in this culture of just wanting to be skinny and having a ton of energy. So we're willing to buy just about anything to make that happen. And something you said the first time you were on the pod, and it stuck with me, was I think it was your thinnest self is not necessarily your healthiest self or your best self.
Mm-hmm.
That had a huge impact on me because that is completely counter to the way in which I was raised. Like everything was about being rail thin. Skinny was in. That was the outfit. That was the glamour. It's taken a lot of work to unpack that and retrain my mind to say, no, my healthy self, the one that has the energy to play with my daughter, to go out for walks, that doesn't have to be rail thin. It's the happiness from.
Mm-hmm.
So do we
Yeah,
still have,
exactly.
because you know what, last time you were on here, we talked about Ozempic. That's not in the news anymore. Like whatever happened to that? But the Ozempic is also that fad of needing to be extra, extra skinny, like having some sort of a magical elixir to make that happen. Whatever happened to Ozempic? I haven't heard anybody talk about that anymore.
It's because everybody is on it. Everyone's micro dosing it these days. Not me,
Oh.
but literally, I think people are putting it in their coffee these days, right, Rich?
Yeah, there is this whole microdosing thing, which is kind of silly because the dosages are researched and the effective dosages are what they are. So microdosing may not even work, which is kind of funny. The thing with Ozempic and those class of drugs, so GLP-1s, glucagon-like peptide 1, the ones that basically decrease hunger and manage blood sugar, they are very strong, still being used. They are very good obesity drugs, very good diabetes drugs. There are other ones now that are in clinical trials, I believe, other versions that are like triple triple action instead of even dual or single action. That whole area of prescription drugs is essentially booming. It's interesting to see how that is going to continue to evolve, especially in the industry I'm in, where we educate health, fitness, and wellness professionals. That's something that we're being asked to do. We actually did have a small a course on coaching clients with GLP-1s because that's becoming more commonplace in fitness centers and health clubs. The Ozempics of the world and is actually only going to expand with new drugs. One of the issues with it is because you lose weight so rapidly and because you might be under eating calories, you also lose muscle mass, like you would with any kind of low-calorie diet. It's not specific to GLP-1s. There are even some classes of drugs being researched that may preserve muscle mass as you lose weight. It's sort of that whole magic bullet or magic pill that we've all joked about over the years. Boy, I wish this existed kind of thing is probably right around the corner. It's very interesting to see how that's evolving. It can reinforce the whole, being thin is the thing to be. So there is some danger there in that sense.
Something I would love to know, can you teach us or tell us how to read a label so that if we're getting something that's got these claims, when we read the label, what kinds of information is on the label that can give us some clarity of what we're buying so that we know if it's something that is evidence-based or not?
So let's say a supplement or something?
Yeah.
The labels on supplements won't necessarily tell you that it's evidence-based or not. Some context there is the FDA regulates supplements as they do food, basically. So there isn't any kind of requirement to show that your supplement works or that there is evidence backing your formulation. What they do require, though, is you can't make a medical claim on your supplement. So you'll see things like may improve or boost your immunity, may support gut health, or different things like that. They're supposed to use soft language, and there has to be something on there saying it's not intended to treat a disease or a medical condition. So that's really about it. If you wanted to see if something is evidence-based, you're really going to want to look up the main ingredient. You could go into, let's say, Google Scholar or PubMed or Medline, so sort of these indexed databases of studies, and you could actually type in the ingredient or even do an AI search. Is there any evidence-based, scientific, valid information to support the use of X for Y in terms of the supplement ingredient for a particular outcome? And then you could see what comes up. That would probably be the main thing, is to develop some scientific literacy around what you're consuming on social media and also what you might potentially buy. A lot of the studies too, you're going to want to sort of take a look at the study or use some AI prompts to ask questions about a study. But a lot of the studies that supplement companies even use to support their product are just ones that show that, yeah, when you take this, your blood levels of this increase. And that might be it. That might be the only study they have. Or the only study they have might be based on a mouse model or even an in vitro study, which is basically, a petri dish. So a lot of the studies that these companies may use are not even anything based on human consumption yet, and they might be early stages. So that's really up to the consumer. If you want to take a supplement based on something that worked well in a dish, that's up to you, and you might see benefit, you might not. For the most part, the only harm you see is harm to your wallet. Supplements are generally safe unless you take dosages that are too high. I think I just saw something on the news the other day that someone was taking way too much turmeric and it was hurting her liver.
Oh.
Yeah, you have to stay within the recommended dosages. The label itself, when you're buying something, won't necessarily tell you if there's evidence for it.
So when we're talking about influencers, what are some visual tricks that they do? Because, we spend a lot of time online, we're on social media. Instagram seems to have just completely changed for me, where it's just ads. I don't even see pictures of friends anymore.
Mm-hmm.
TikTok also is a place for influencers, and there's a lot of money to be made. How do they visually convince us that something is good or the information is good?
They'll use a lot of anecdotal or
Mhm.
personal stories or success stories that may come up in a 30-second reel or whatever, or on TikTok or on Instagram. They'll give you a quick hit of, let's say, a before and after. They'll throw out some stats, are misrepresented or not, real quickly. They might throw up a visual of a stat. When it comes to, let's say, weight loss, a lot of them will sell dramatic transformations in small time frames. And that to me is a pretty big red flag. If you see someone showing a dramatic transformation in health, whether it's weight loss or really anything else, in a short time frame, that might tell you that the focus is not on sustainable health. The focus might be on aesthetics, for example. That's a red flag, because is what you're selling actual sustainable health strategies, or are you just selling some sort of short-term fix to make some money? And then that also fosters, some unrealistic expectations around your health as well. So anything that's dramatic visually or dramatic in language, you definitely want to take some caution there, because science is not dramatic. Science is slow, science is nuanced, and science takes time, and science can evolve and change. So anything that's dramatic and black and white is an immediate flag.
So, Rudy, I want to ask you then, because now I'm curious, like, what are the laws around this? Let's say somebody's doing a before and after picture in order to sell a product, and then you find out that the before and after picture is really something that they took within 10 minutes of each other. They just changed the lighting and using that as evidence of how the product works. What, like, is there any, like, when is it illegal?
You know what's awesome about that question is how much faith you have in this municipal bond lawyer to think that I would know the full volume of all laws. However,
but this is like contract law, right? Like what Rich said, may or this.
There are literally probably January 1st of every year, I don't know, not an exaggeration, maybe 1 million new laws that come into play. Maybe that's just in California, but all kidding aside, I mean, there's tons of laws. But I do know when you're talking about influencers and you're talking about Instagram and you're talking about social media stuff, I do know that the FCC, the Federal Communications Commission, does have some rules and guidelines about whether or not it's a paid sponsored ad. You know, what's really interesting is what I've been seeing lately is these little notices about this was generated with AI. This was AI influencer. This was, I'm seeing that. I don't know if that's a mandatory yet. I haven't seen any laws on that quite yet, but I am seeing a lot more disclosures about that. But I don't think there is a law per se about the before and after pictures, but there's definitely laws out there that would govern fraudulent information. I mean, you can't commit fraud, but where the law works is what can you get away with? Notice what Rich was saying about supplements and whether they're regulated and what you're allowed to say. You can say this may do this may do that. This is intended to do X, but it's not a guarantee of it. As a lawyer, I love hearing that language, because you never want to guarantee anything to anybody. And so those supplement companies sound like they're operating within the law. So anybody that's out there that's putting out these ads, my guess is, and professional ads, like, like commercial ad, when you're watching TV, if you still watch TV and the ads pop up and they show the before and after pictures, there are legitimate people following the laws, the FCC laws and everything like that. Now on Instagram and TikTok, and you're just following some influencer, I don't know. I mean, who knows? Who knows if those people are even in the United States and even subject to United States laws, and who really knows anything these days? That's why I'm really liking this topic, because it kind of goes to the whole point of our show, which is building critical thinking skills. So Rich, whether or not I just kind of, artfully backtracked in not answering Gwen's question, which was, I thought it was pretty artful in it. What are some tips that you would give to people in being critical in looking at these ads?
Yeah, it was artful, but also accurate. So that matches my understanding that the FTC does have authority over online advertising and protecting consumers from deceptive practices. But also the issue there is that I think a lot of that, when it comes to influencers, really covers explicit endorsements and sponsorships. It doesn't necessarily cover everything an influencer says or sells. So it's really only when they're being paid by someone else as an ad do they have to have some requirements around there. If I'm selling my own product, the wellness industry is largely unregulated regarding safety and effectiveness. I don't really have to prove that. I'm going to make an attempt to sound like I prove that. I'm going to make an attempt in my ads to sound correct and sound sciencey. I may even use some scientific sounding language. There's usually a grain of truth in what I might be saying too. But I ultimately don't have to prove with any solid evidence or a body of evidence regarding the safety and effectiveness of what I'm selling. That is sort of the first thing when you're critically evaluating these things. You want to walk in understanding that this person is not bound to any kind of code of ethics or scope of practice. Now, if they are a licensed healthcare professional, let's say a psychiatrist or a therapist or a medical doctor or a registered dietitian, those professions have regulatory boards. They have licensure associated with practice. And that also means there's a scope of practice and code of ethics that they have to abide by, or they could lose their license or be placed in poor standing in the board. Those procedures or standards standards, I should say, prohibit deceptive practices. So that'd be one of the first things you look at are the credentials of the person that is giving you information. Not only that, maybe a PhD is a good idea there, or some kind of degree, something that indicates they've dedicated a portion of their life to the study of their field. If they are giving you nutrition advice, for example, it would be good if they had an RD, registered dietitian, or RGN, registered dietitian nutritionist. If they are talking about public health, it would be good if they had either a PhD in some related field or topic, or an MPH, a master's in public health. What you do often see too is someone might be a doctor and call themselves a doctor, but they're not a physician in the area they're trying to sell you something in. I might have someone who is an ear, nose, throat doctor, and they're showing up endorsing something that's talking about cardiovascular health, right? So you want to make sure that they have expertise in the area you're looking at is one of the first things. And then you also want to take a look at their language as well. What kind of language are they using? Are they using that dramatic language? Are they trying to pit themselves against big pharma so you can trust them instead? And then look at the accuracy of the claim. So go ahead and develop, again, that scientific literacy. Can I do a little bit of digging online and try and figure out what's going on? The AI prompts and stuff, and even with Google searches giving you a quick AI snippet at the top of the search, those actually have become very useful. And I think those are very helpful for someone who's trying to investigate a claim and the accuracy of a claim. As you're critically evaluating, look at the motivation of the person. Are they telling you that sugar is the evil that is causing all of your health problems? And then on their website, they also happen to sell a continuous glucose monitor. There's a definite gain there, or financial gain that they might have. Another important thing is, do they acknowledge that your health is multifactorial, right? Do they acknowledge that there are many things that contribute to your health and well-being? Or are they giving you a single root cause? Oftentimes what these influencers do will say, the root cause of your problem is this, and I have the fix for that. They'll often say, oh, traditional medicine just masks symptoms. I have the root cause. It's this, and this product, if you buy it, will fix that. And then lastly, really be aware of your own vulnerabilities and preconceptions as you go and look at something. We have this confirmation bias, right? We're naturally drawn to things that align to what we already believe. So really walk in with a healthy skepticism and take a little time to assess the expert, assess their motivation, assess the purpose of it, and assess the accuracy of what they're selling.
Who's the target audience for a lot of this stuff?
That's a great question. I think for
Thank
a lot
you.
of it, yeah, there's also an issue that brings up too of, are we talking about wellness or public health? Because you're seeing a lot of wellness people dive into public health issues. The public health thing is really about what affects communities, right? Access to food, racism, environmental toxins, right? In terms of air quality, water quality, that's public health. Wellness, when you look at individual wellness, you're looking at probably someone who has some discretionary income and is concerned about their well-being and their health, and is, by all sort of basic standards of health, is probably already healthy. Their food needs are met. They have housing, right? They have access to clean water. By those baseline standards, they're already healthy and not worried about where their next meal is going to come from, or can they get a nutritious meal, or what's the air quality like where they live. They're baseline healthy and they have discretionary income. That's generally who a lot of these wellness influencers are going after, because they have something to sell. So they want to find someone who's looking to move beyond basic needs being met and sort of quote unquote optimize their health.
Do you think women are targeted more than men?
I do.
And the reason I ask that is because some people have said that the idea of this obsession with body for women, because I'm a woman and my algorithm will show me more of that. So I really don't know what's going on with men and their psychology around fitness. But I know that there's been some theorizing that it's about control, that desire for thinness is really for women to constantly be obsessed with their presentation because their value is in their presentation, in their body. So instead of having their mind think about philosophy, for instance, or science, or any kind of a hobby, it's a culture of forcing women to be obsessed with their appearance, to keep them in line, that is their primary function, is to be an object of beauty and desire for a man. I don't know if that's too out there or too weird, but do you see any kind of cultural undertones about the idea of what a woman should be that is wrapped up in this influencer ideology or motive? Or is it just
I think
money?
it's both. This is, just in my opinion, I do see that whole, women need to fit a certain ideal because they're supposed to present a certain way to the public and to men. The money is being made by psychologically exploiting that thought or that framework of how you're supposed to be, present, and look. I think with women, it's that appearance thing is what's driving a lot of this. For men, I am seeing more of the claim your personal power kind of messaging. So there's a lot of testosterone stuff right now. So supporting your testosterone or getting tested for testosterone and then getting testosterone therapy even online. Those are sort of the main categories I see right now. For women, it's presenting a certain way. And for men, it's this personal power kind of alpha thing that is coming along. I think there is a lot of an aesthetic issue with the male side of it too. Like you're supposed to present as muscular, ripped. And that's where the testosterone thing comes in too, because they say it's, it's going to help you shed body fat and you're going to feel great and you're going to put on muscle and it'll reverse aging. I think reversal of aging and longevity is something that's very big right now across both genders, or all genders, I should say. This fight against even looking your age, quote unquote, or being older or aging gracefully. There's a pretty big push against that right now. The longevity space, when it's talked about correctly, we'll talk about no matter how you age, what you chronologically might be able to function throughout your years, especially those last, let's say, 10 years. You still want to be able to function well and do the things you want to do. That's, to me, is a legitimate way of talking about longevity. But I think a lot of the predatory stuff around longevity is the anti-aging kind of thing in terms of your appearance. Most of the economy around wellness, too, I think a lot of it has to do with beauty products.
Yeah, not too long ago, this was a very unscientific thing, but it ended up on social media. There were two pictures of men. One picture of the man was, and they were both shirtless, was like a bodybuilder-esque type physique. Then there was another man who was average, not too much, but he didn't have that level of toned. I guess it was asked of women, which one do you find more attractive? And also men, which do you think is like the more attractive? And the men went for that super cut bodybuilder and the women did not. And the men were surprised that the women actually preferred the guy who was, I don't want to say soft, but not that cut. And so it just showed this disparity of what it is that women find safe, loving, and a partner in a heterosexual type way or attractive versus what the men think that they're supposed to be. That same thing wasn't done with images of women, but I would imagine that it would be kind of similar, that the woman's idea of the perfect body versus maybe would be attractive to a man are two different things.
Yes, for sure. Yeah, it's kind of funny that you mentioned that. I've talked with fitness professionals before, women fitness professionals, and they actually have told me, and this isn't a large sample size by any means, but more than a couple, and they said they actually don't like dating men that are super ripped all the time because they're just not fun to be around. Because they're sort of to maintain that level of body fat and have the like super ripped six pack, you have to live a certain way, and so you're the person that's bringing your food everywhere with you, wherever you go, and you're not drinking anything, and you're not, whatever it is you want to talk about with that lifestyle. But it takes a lot to maintain that lifestyle or maintain that physique, and they're just such a huge portion of their life is devoted to the maintenance of that they actually aren't as sort of available to just have fun with their partner.
Yeah, I think the causal factor is kind of misunderstood. So when somebody says they want to be in shape in order to attract a partner or something, people who are healthy, I'll just put a broad spectrum in terms of in shape. It's not actually the body that is the attraction, but it is the happiness that one gets from the activities that put them in shape. And that's actually the attractiveness is the draw. So like when you are exercising and you feel lighter and you're able to handle stress better, the byproduct is, yeah, maybe you'll slim down and be a bit more toned, but it's actually that energy of spirit that is the attractive force. It's not necessarily just the body, or that's what I think.
Yeah, I agree with that. And that's a movement for wellness and longevity really should be, is it's increasing your capacity for things or maintaining your capacity for things. That means a lot more just on a humanistic level than exercise for purely aesthetic reasons.
Something else that struck me about this conversation is that there was the young woman, a very pretty woman. She's quite well known. She made a video that I found to be kind of cruel, where she was saying, you don't need big pharma to get skinny and all these drugs. Just eat a salad and go out for a walk, or just get a gym membership. That made me think about all of these different contributing factors as to your body shape. So I know that a lot of women, when they're going through perimenopause and menopause, that what worked for them in their 20s and 30s simply will not work. Like they will put on 20, 30 pounds and be very frustrated. And with that frustration is a lot of shame, a lot of shame. So we still have this idea that if somebody is larger, that they are doing something wrong or they're not a good person. And then that's internalized, looking at somebody's body and then automatically making all sorts of assumptions. So I wonder if you see any of that being played upon, that the goodness of a person, like how disciplined they are or whatnot, is expressed in their body shape. But, I mentioned perimenopause and menopause. What are some other factors that would contribute to somebody having a difficult time with weight, that it's not just a matter of a salad and a walk?
Yeah, so when you bring up weight stigma or weight bias, that itself is actually bad for your health. So when they've researched it, weight stigma, and they've done the statistical analysis sort of separating out other factors, right? And then they've isolated weight stigma. Weight stigma alone, even if you statistically account for all the other conflating variables, is bad for your health. So weight stigma is that internalization of it. Weight stigma is a very big problem in healthcare. When you go to a doctor and if you're in a larger body, they automatically assume that your medical issues may, and I'm not saying every physician does this, but this is a pattern that's been documented. The assumption is your issue is your weight, and therefore they're going to default to lose weight as your primary medical intervention. At the end of the day, you need to be in a caloric deficit to lose weight, right? You need to burn more calories than you consume. That's sort of the biological underpinnings of weight loss, right? But just because the math is simple doesn't mean that everything that affects that is simple. There's a whole host of things, and I wish I had the diagram in front of me, because there's a diagram that talks about all the contributing factors to weight management. There's all kinds of things that contribute to your ability to manage your weight that have nothing to do with personal responsibility. And that's the danger of the personal responsibility narrative, is that if you're in a larger body, it's 100% your fault and your responsibility. But, obviously, like the hormonal changes you'd see during menopause, right? You get an increase in fat distribution around the midsection. Hormones, obviously, or changes in hormone levels, that's one thing. Stress is pretty huge when it comes to weight maintenance, because elevated cortisol can not only contribute to increased abdominal fat distribution, but also just even increasing cravings that you may have for food. Your metabolic health, obviously genetics, environmental health, the neighborhood you might live in, the healthcare's response to you. You may actually avoid healthcare because of the weight stigma you might be experiencing, which will in turn increase the weight you may put on. There's all kinds of things that affect our ability to manage our weight that really make it far more complex. And obesity, for example, should really be thought of as a sort of a low-grade chronic inflammatory disease, right? It's not just, oh, this person has a hard time putting down the fork and needs to walk more. That's not what it is. There's a lot of things that go into being a larger body, and that there is that lack of sensitivity to that across media that really can be harmful. It can be harmful for people because people end up actually avoiding behaviors that might make them healthier, like going to see a physician, because they're afraid of weight stigma or bias.
Can you give me kind of like a breakdown for the lay person? Why is it that, let's say when I was younger, I could eat fast food, I could drink alcohol, and it would not really impact me, and I would be able to burn it off, like not have a lot of weight gain or anything like that? But now in my 40s, if I have any of that, it will show up on the scale and it will affect my day to day. So what happened on a scientific level to my body that made that kind of shift of what my body could metabolize and tolerate then as opposed to now? What happened in that 20-year span?
The one thing that people will always say is, oh, my metabolism slowed down. And that's not necessarily true. There is some slowing, but it's not significant enough to kind of account for a lot of what what people experience. Your metabolic rate is generally pretty stable across your lifespan, but your metabolic efficiency might not be. So, your ability to handle alcohol, maybe you're less efficient at it as we age, right? I mean, organs and reactions, things like that. We just processes age just like we do, and there's cellular aging. But a lot of it too has to do with kind of what happens in life along the way. Often we're more active when we're younger, might participate in sports or just generally just out and doing more. And then we become professionals, so we sit more. We might also be experiencing a lot more stress, especially people in our generation right now. We might be caring for young children at the same time as we're caring for older parents. That's a lot of stress on somebody, to be caregivers, caretakers, and then also trying to maintain a professional life. Those kinds of things can contribute to difficulty in maintaining a weight, maintaining your body weight. Lots of things happen. And then, of course, hormonal changes as we age. Different things kind of start kicking in around life and systemically that just make it more challenging to maintain that, calorie balance, as it were.
Yeah, I enjoyed wine, and I am telling you, in the last couple of years, I have cut down on it, and it's almost entirely out of my life. If you had said that to me 10 years ago, that would be my reality, I would not believe you. But it wasn't any kind of conscious calorie control. It was, I have a couple glasses of wine. I mean, I am slurring like lampshade on the head. I mean, and then I cannot wake up the next morning. I don't feel good after it. So that kind of negated any desire to have it.
And I think that's a good thing.
Oh, yeah.
I think it's a lucky thing. I think it's our body showing us option A, option B. Sure, you want to have that extra glass of wine, or you want to have that extra cocktail, or you want to have that extra thing. Your ass is going to pay for it the next day. Sometimes it takes 5, 10, 15, 20 of those, I'll never do that again. I'll never do that again. Please, dear God, I'll never do that again. For it to finally, not speaking from experience, but for it to finally sink in, like, you know what? I don't need that extra glass of wine, or I don't need that. It's just not worth it. I'm glad about that.
What have you cut out?
It's interesting you should ask that. And I'm happy to be honest. Because I'm always honest. I am really just a light beer drinker now. And I see some of my friends who still like the scotch and still like the bourbon and still like those things. And I like those things on occasion, but not anymore. It was an interesting shift. Like right when we went into the pandemic, I just kind of didn't like the harder, larger volumes of alcohol. And I just lost it naturally. And I just prefer a light beer, something under 5%, a Coors Light or something around that. And, I'll have a couple of those and I'm good. And I feel lucky that I went into that shift. It wasn't like purposeful, like, oh, I need to cut this out. No, it just kind of happened naturally. My body said, hey, this doesn't work for you anymore. Cool. Okay. On occasion, sure, I'll have a cocktail with my wife, or we go out and we will have a special occasion. But yeah, no, I'm thankful for it.
Rich, I want to ask you, with this whole influencer culture, have you seen on your end, or even if you know anything about the medical community that is like sounding the alarm bells, like somebody comes to you for some advice, fitness, wellness, and you realize that they have consumed a lot of this influencer stuff? What kind of shifts? Because I mean, I can remember like Jenny Craig and Jane Fonda workouts and, all of these things. Like weight loss always seems to have been part of the culture, but is there something right now that is a shift, or there's alarm bells like, hey, we have to address this?
I think the medical community or the professional sort of scientific community is doing their best to combat a lot of that. And there are some people that are doing a very good job that have large followings on Instagram, for example. In general, science isn't very good at that narrative, at crafting narratives and getting that emotional pull. And because it's not sexy, the algorithm doesn't favor it. The main issue is the exposure. And there's that kind of illusory truth. The more misinformation I'm exposed to over time, the more likely I am to start believing it. So that, unfortunately, is overcoming and outpacing good information. I think that's what makes it difficult for professionals to then combat some of that. So if a client or patient comes in with, this is what I found online, a lot of times health professionals and scientists will say, well, it doesn't necessarily work like that. It actually works like this. And then they really have to go the extra mile to prove their point or to make their case. Because the person has been so inundated with misinformation, they really hold that to be true. And that's not their fault. It's just how our brain works, right? So we really have to sit down and go, well, this is what the body of evidence says. And then you ultimately have to let the individual make the decision, right? Unless it's going to harm them, you really just have to present the right information as you see it, or the correct supported information. And then ultimately they make the decision that they think is best for their health.
And what is the cost? What is the consequence of not putting the influencer culture in check?
Harm to public health. That's really the cost. Because what happens too is we're spending time trying to disprove things or trying to show why they're not correct, or they could be misleading or deceptive or harmful. Then you're not spending time actually doing the work to find out what the right strategies and solutions are. So it actually slows down the progress of the right information. You have some of these sort of they combat the influencer deception or deceptive practices, and they're spending their time doing that. That's become their work. That is becoming how they're progressing or studying or moving forward public health, is combating the influencer messaging as opposed to maybe other things they could be doing with their time. I mean, it's still good work and it's still valid work and it's needed work, but in my opinion, it slows things down ultimately.
Rich, thank you so much for being on Good is in the Details again, giving us your wisdom, trying to figure out fact from fiction. Yeah, thank you so much.
Thank you so much for having me again.
Thank you, Rich.
Yeah, appreciate you guys.
Thanks for reaching out, man. We really enjoy your ideas.
Good is in the Details is produced by Dr. Gwendolyn Dolsky and Rudy Sallow. And if you're listening on Apple or Spotify, please scroll down to the bottom and hit that 5-star review. Take a screenshot of this episode or your favorite episode and tag us on Instagram, Good is in the Details Pod. You can also find us on Facebook, Good is in the Details Pod. We're on Blue Sky. I started at Pinterest. And of course, go to Patreon for all the extra content and to stay in the know, patreon.com/Good is in the Details. We'd like to thank our sponsor for this episode, AvonmoreInc.com. It's that small bridge business that started in the 90s and grew to an international sensation amongst bridge players. If you like bridge, or if anyone you know likes bridge, you gotta go to AvonmoreInc.com. They have everything you need for your next bridge party. Let them know Good is in the Details sent you.